من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So last week then we began the first class into this series regarding the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And in the first class last week, we did the opening lines of Al-Urjuza Al-Mi'iyya, that poem that we are using as the basis for our progress. We began with the first few lines last week, where Ibn Abil Izz Al-Hanafi, who is the author of that poem, said, Alhamdulillahi al-Qadim al-Bari, thumma salatuhu ala al-Mukhtar, wa ba'duha kasirat al-Rasul, manzumatan mujazat al-Fusul, مولده في عاشر الفضيل ربيع الأول عام الفيل لكنما المشهور ثاني عشره في يوم الاثنين طلوع فجره ووافق العشرين من نيسانا. 4.5 lines, that's what we did last time. Those lines after the introduction, they were talking about the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they were mentioning some of the opinions about the date that he was born on. So there were different opinions, like we said. Scholars have mentioned there are even 6 legitimate opinions mentioned, and most of them revolve around Rabi' al-Awwal, the Islamic month. Some of them saying it was on the 8th or the 10th or the 12th. And there are even other opinions. One of them says it was Ramadan when he was born. But what is known is that it was in Aam al-Fil, as it is said, the year of the elephant. And we spoke about the story of the elephant, Abraha al-Ashram, and when he came with his army wanting to destroy the Kaaba. That story we mentioned last time, as it is in the Quran. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. And the last thing we mentioned was the line, the beginning of the 5th line, وَوَافَقَ الْعِشْرِينَ مِن نَيْسَانَ. That what is mentioned is that he was born on the equivalent of the 20th of April, according to some of the opinions, and when you work out the dates, that it would have been the 20th of April, he mentions. Then moving on to the next section, وَقَبْلَهُ حين أبيه حانا وبعد عامين غدا فطيما جاءت به مرضعه سليما حليمة لأمه وعادت به لأهلها كما أرادت. And then we'll do the lines after that. This next line, وَقَبْلَهُ حَيْنُ أَبِيهِ حَانَا. He says, and before that, the allotted time of death for his father came. Before that, the time of death of his father came. Before what? What does he mean? Before what? Before his birth. Because the opening section was all about the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He then says, and before that, before he was actually born, meaning he was still in the womb of his mother was still pregnant with him, not born yet, the death of his father already occurred. قبله, before that, حين, the time of his father, أبيه حانا, it came. So here then, it talks about the death of his father, and the correct opinion is what he has mentioned there. The correct opinion is what he has mentioned there, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not born yet and his father already died. There is some difference of opinion about that. There are some other statements of some of the scholars about that, and that is the way Seerah is. You will notice as we go along, there are always slight variations to what the scholars mention about how this happened and how that happened. When we get to the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ, how old was he? How old was Khadija? There are differences there too. And there are statements of the scholars that are different about that too. So here, there are some other statements that do exist. Some of them do say that the messenger was born. He had been born, then his father died. There are some statements of the scholars who say that. But what is correct with regards to this is that he was not born yet. The messenger was not born yet. And some of the scholars of Seerah, like Ibn Ishaq, famous, he is absolutely certain of that. He believes with certainty that the father of the messenger died before the messenger was born. And that then makes the Prophet ﷺ from before he was even born into a what? An orphan. Because Islamically speaking, an orphan is a child who has not yet reached the age of puberty and his father has died. Even if his mother is still alive, because in the culture here, normally what they call an orphan is somebody whose both parents have died. That is the way people think of it. But Islamically speaking, an orphan is a child who has not yet reached the age of puberty, not yet reached the age of puberty, and his father has died. So with the Prophet ﷺ, it is at the pinnacle of being an orphan. You could not be more of an orphan, because the Prophet ﷺ was still in the womb of his mother and his father already passed away. So that is like the greatest amount of an orphan somebody could be. That your father has passed away and you are not even born yet, as opposed to a child who is 5 years old and his father passes away, or 7 years old and his father passes away, or even maybe up to 10 or so and his father passes away. The Prophet ﷺ was not even born and his father had passed away. And so when he was born as an orphan. He was born as an orphan. As it mentions in the Quran, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا. He found you as an orphan. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا. As an orphan, in reference to the Prophet ﷺ, فَآوَى. Then it mentions after that, وَبَعْدَ عَامَيْنِ غَدَى فَطِيمًا جَاءَتْ بِهِ مُرْضِعُهُ سَلِيمًا حَلِيمَةٌ لِأُمِّهِ وَعَادَتْ بِهِ لِأَهْلِهَا كَمَا أَرَادَتْ. In this part now, it mentions that after the messenger was now born, then of course he was being looked after by his mother, who is Amina, and after 2 years, he غدا فاطمة وفطم الصبي هو فصله من الرضاع, that he stopped his breastfeeding. A child, when they are young, in the first 2 years of their life, they may be upon the breastfeeding. So after the 2 years, that breastfeeding then stops. وفطم عليه الصلاة والسلام بعد أن أتم الرضاعة حولين كاملين. So the messenger then stopped the breastfeeding after 2 years. When he reached the age of 2, after 2 years, he stopped the breastfeeding. He was not being breastfed. And this is mentioned in the Quran about that ruling of 2 years of breastfeeding. وَالْوَالِدَاتُ يُرْضِعْنَ أَوْلَادَهُنَّ حَوْلَيْنِ كَامِلَيْنِ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ أَنْ يُتِمَّ الرَّضَاعَةَ. That the mothers, they can do their breastfeeding for 2 complete years, for those who wish to do the full term. The full term is the 2 years of breastfeeding. So after those 2 years, his wet nurse جاءت به مرضعه إلى والدته في مكة سليما وعافى. When the messenger was born, he had been sent off with a wet nurse. And this was their habit. They used to do this, that they would give their babies to a wet nurse meaning the woman who then breastfeeds them, and the child would be breastfed. It mentions here after 2 years, his wet nurse Halima as-Sa'diyya, she then came back with him to his mother, and he was safe and sound and healthy, in good health and strong, a good, strong, healthy child, the Prophet ﷺ. So his wet nurse Halima, the daughter of Abu Dhu'ayb as-Sa'diyya, she then brought him back. There is a difference of opinion as to whether this wet nurse Halima, the daughter of Abu Dhu'ayb as-Sa'diyya, whether she became Muslim or not. There's a difference on that, whether she in the end became Muslim or not. There's ikhtilaf upon that affair, her and her husband, whether they became Muslim or not. So she came back with the Prophet Muhammad, the child at the time, back to his mother Amina. وعادت به لأهلها لأنه أعجبها كثيرا ورأت من البركة والخير في وجوده صلى الله عليه وسلم شيئا عجبا لم تألفه ولم تعهده في من أرضعتهم من الصغار. فلما جاءت به إلى أمه أرادت أن تقنع أمه أن تبقيه عندها فترة أطول. So this wet nurse Halima bint Abi Dhu'ayb as-Sa'diyya, after 2 years now, the term for the breastfeeding is ended. So now she has to come back and return the baby back to his mother. But she was so happy with that child, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she was so impressed with him and so happy with him, and she had such a good bond with him, that when she brought him back after the 2 years, she actually had an idea that she was going to try and convince Amina, the mother of Muhammad. She was going to try and convince her, let me keep him a bit longer. She wanted to keep him longer, beyond the term. The breastfeeding term has ended, but she wanted to keep him longer for the bond that she had experienced with this child, the barakah that she had experienced with this child, the child Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she came with this idea, with this desire to try and convince Amina to let her keep him a while longer. So some of the reasons she came and told Amina about, some of the reasons she used, they mentioned that Mecca was obviously our equivalent these days of a bustling town or city. Halima was out in the nomadic areas, in the countryside as we call it now. And so she said to the mother of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to Amina, that you should allow him to stay out there in the countryside with me a bit longer. Here in Mecca, hustle and bustle, so many people, illnesses going, illnesses amongst the people, and other, the weather, the climate here in the city, it's not the same as the beautiful climate of the countryside, the fresh air of the countryside, the fresh water, different things about the countryside. So she said, you should let him stay with me a bit longer out in the countryside and those areas, away from the hustle and bustle and these areas of Mecca and illnesses and the climate and other things. It's not so good here. He'll be stronger and healthier growing up a bit longer out there with the freshness of the countryside. So these were some of the reasons that she used, and this was what she wanted to do. And the mother of Muhammad was convinced. She was convinced with that reasoning, those kinds of reasons, and she allowed her child Muhammad to go back with Halima as-Sa'diyya for a while longer, to go and stay out in the countryside, the freshness of that environment, to stay there a while longer. So he went back with her and stayed with her. Then it mentions فَبَعْدَ شَهْرَيْنِ انشِقَاقُ بَطْنِهِ وَقِيلَ بَعْدَ أَرْبَعٍ مِّن سِنِّهِ. That after he then returned back with Halima as-Sa'diyya, so right now he is of the age just past 2 years old, and he's gone back with his wet nurse Halima as-Sa'diyya. It mentions, some of them say that it was just 2 months after that, that the incident occurred of the splitting of the chest of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When his chest was split open, that this incident occurred just a couple of months after he went back with Halima to the countryside. So he was 2 years old at the time, just past 2 years old at the time. And this was the first incident of his chest being cut open, because there were actually how many times? 4, some say 3, but there were more than just this one. This wasn't the only time that the chest of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was split open. This was the first time. It was the first time that it occurred, and this was 2 months after he went back with Halima. But some say, there is another opinion he mentions right here, وَقِيلَ بَعْدَ أَرْبَعٍ مِّن سِنِّهِ. Some say actually it would have been a couple of years after he went back. So he would have been around 4 years old when it happened. So there's a difference of opinion about the exact timing of when this first incident occurred. Was it when he was 2 years old, just a couple of months after he went back with Halima to the countryside area? Or was it a couple of years after that, so he would have been 4 years old when it first happened? There are narrations, there are hadith about this, hadith that talk about this incident that occurred. And in this incident, there are different narrations. One of them from Sahih Muslim. In the incident of Sahih Muslim, or the way that it is narrated there, from Anas ibn Malik, he says, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أتاه جبريل صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو يلعب مع الغلمان فأخذه فصرعه فشق عن قلبه فاستخرج القلب فاستخرج منه علقة فقال هذا حظ الشيطان منك ثم غسله في طست من ذهب بماء زمزم ثم نعم. That opening section, it mentions that one time the Prophet ﷺ was playing with some other children, because he was either 2 or 4, whichever one of the opinions. So he was playing with some young children. And Jibreel alayhi salam came to him as he was playing with those children. And Jibreel alayhi salam took him. Jibreel alayhi salam took him and laid him down and split his chest open. Split his chest open. And it mentions in some of the narrations the other children were still there. They could see what was happening. Split his chest open and took his heart out. استخرج القلب. Then, after taking his heart out, then from within the heart, it was like the heart was then split open. The heart was then split open, and from within the heart, this black, what you may call a clot, a type of clot, was taken out from the heart. This dark area, this dark clot was taken out from the heart. And then it was washed. Then it says in the narration that Jibreel said, that black clot, this is the portion of the shaitan. This is what the shaitan had within you. What the shaitan was attempting within you. So that was removed from him. And then it was washed. The heart was washed in a tast, as it mentions, this type of bowl from gold with zamzam water. And then the heart was sealed, and then that was put back into the chest of the Prophet ﷺ. ثُمَّ أَعَادَهُ فِي مَكَانِهِ. So now, all of that was done. The chest was opened up, the heart was taken out, the heart was opened up, and this black clot was removed and then washed, and then the heart was put back into the chest of the Prophet ﷺ. And the other young children saw what was going on. They saw what was happening. وَجَاءَ الْغِلْمَانِ يَسْعَوْنَ إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ يعني ظِئْرِهِ. So the other young children, they went running to Halima. This was all happening with Halima out in the countryside. They went running to Halima. It says in the narration, they went running to his mother. And what that means is at the time, his wet nurse. So they went running to his wet nurse. فَقَالُوا, and they said, إِنَّ مُحَمَّدًا قَدْ قُتِلْ. They said, Muhammad has been killed. They saw how his chest has been opened up, and they witnessed that. They said, Muhammad has been killed, taken down by the angel, and all of that happening. They came running to the witness saying, Muhammad has been killed. إِنَّ مُحَمَّدًا قَدْ قُتِلْ. فَاسْتَقْبَلُوهُ وَهُوَ مُنْتَقِعُ اللَّوْنِ. So when they saw him, the Prophet ﷺ was of course alive, but his color had changed. His color had drained. It's like they may say a yellowy kind of color. The color from his skin had drained. And some of the scholars, they mention in the narrations, etc., that was from fear. The messenger had experienced something that was completely out of the ordinary, an angel coming, splitting open his chest, taking out his heart. Of course, and especially at the age of 2 or 4. So they say he had lost the color from his skin, from the fright of what had just happened, from being afraid of what had just happened, that he had lost the color in his skin. Anas ibn Malik said, وَقَدْ كُنْتُ أَرَى أَثَرَ ذَلِكَ الْمَخِيطِ فِي صَدْرِهِ. Anas ibn Malik said, I used to see this, like what we say nowadays, the stitching. That I used to see the stitching marks in his chest. Afterwards, years later, Anas ibn Malik said, I could see the scar in his chest from where that had occurred. It's mentioned by Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar in Fath al-Bari. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar, in his explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari, Fath al-Bari, he mentions in there about these incidents that happened and how many times it happened. He said, فَالْأَوَّلْ وَقَعَ فِيهِ مِنَ الزِّيَادَةِ كَمَا عِنْدَ مُسْلِمٍ من حديث أنس فأخرج علق فقال هذا حظ الشيطان منك وكان هذا في زمن الطفولية فنشأ على أكمل الأحوال من العصمة من الشيطان. That the first time the chest of the messenger was split open was this incident when he was a child, either 2 or 4 years old. And Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar says that is so that the messenger at that young age, 2 or 4 years old, had all the effects of the shaitan and what the shaitan had attempted to insert into that child from that age. That darkness was removed from that young age. At the age of 2 or 4, that darkness, that clot was gone. So he was raised up and he grew up upon complete purity of heart. He then grew up upon complete purity of heart, clean heart. Shaitan had no darkness in the heart of the messenger. It was removed, cleansed and taken out. So he was raised or grew up upon purity of heart, safe from shaitan. Then Ibn Hajar says, ثُمَّ وَقَعَ شَقُّ الصَّدْرِ عِنْدَ الْبَعْثِ. The second time he mentions it occurred is at the time when the messenger became a prophet. So that was at the age of 40 years old when he became a prophet. That it occurred again then. There was another occurrence of his heart, of his chest being split open. And that was just at the time when he was being made a prophet at the age of 40. Ibn Hajar says it was done at that time لِيَتَلَقَّى مَا يُوحَى إِلَيْهِ بِقَلْبٍ قَوِيٍّ فِي أَكْمَلِ الْأَحْوَالِ مِنَ التَّطْهِيرِ. So that his heart could be cleansed once again, so that it would be upon absolute 100% purity to now receive the revelation and become a prophet. Cleansed once again to ensure or to make that upon absolute purity to now receive the revelation and become a prophet. So it was done at that time upon receiving the revelation. And the third time Ibn Hajar mentions ثُمَّ وَقَعَ شَقُّ الصَّدْرِ عند إرادة العروج إلى السماء ليتأهب للمناجاة. That the third time it happened, the chest of the messenger was split open, is prior to, before the night of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. On that night we know the messenger was taken up to the heavens and he spoke with Allah. So in readiness for that night, for him to be taken up to the heavens and to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In preparation for that, Ibn Hajar says another incident of his heart being split open, his chest being split open occurred then. And that was around about, how old was the messenger when that happened? There are some differences, we'll get to them, but around about 50. Because some scholars, they say it was around about 3 years before the hijrah. The hijrah was made how many years after the prophethood? 13. He became a prophet at 40. Hijrah was around 53, his age, which means the night of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj was around 50 years old of his age. So that would be the third time his chest was split open. Those are the three that Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar mentions. We'll get to those as we go through the Seerah to those ages. But this is the first incident that occurred. This is the first incident that occurred. There are other narrations about this one as well. In one of them, some of the companions, they said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, أخبرنا عن نفسك, tell us about yourself. قال نعم, the messenger said yes, okay. أنا دعوة إبراهيم دعوة أبي إبراهيم وبشرى أخي عيسى ورأت أمي حين حملت بي أنه خرج منها نور أضاء له قصور الشام واسترضعت في بني سعد بن بكر فبين أنا مع أخ لي خلف بيوتنا نرعى بهما لنا إذ أتاني رجلان عليهما ثياب بيض بطست من ذهب مملوء ثلجا فأخذاني فشقا بطني واستخرجا قلبي فشقاه فاستخرجا منه علقة سوداء فطرحاها ثم غسلا قلبي وبطني بذلك الثلج حتى أنقياه ثم قال أحدهما لصاحبه زنه ب10 من أمته فوزنني بهم فوزنتهم ثم قال زنه ب100 من أمته فوزنني بهم فوزنتهم ثم قال زنه ب1000 من أمته فوزنني بهم فوزنتهم فقال دعه عنك فوالله لو وزنته بأمته لوزنها. There is this narration, and there may be some dispute over its authenticity, but some of the scholars, they've mentioned it is legitimate. Ibn Kathir said it has a good, strong chain of narration, and in any case, it is backed up by the narration we just read out, that is in Muslim. The narration we just read out is in Sahih Muslim previously. So this one now that we're reading, it's another narration, a different one, not in Bukhari Muslim, but it is backed up by that one. In this one it mentions where the companion said to the messenger, tell us about yourself. He said, yes, of course. I am the dua of my father Ibrahim and the glad tidings that Isa alayhi salam gave of my coming. And my mother, when she was pregnant with me, a light emanated from her that lit up the palaces of Sham. And then I was breastfed in the tribe of Sa'ad ibn Bakr, Halima Sa'diyah. And whilst I was there, so the messenger is narrating himself about his childhood in this narration. Whilst I was there, living with Halima, the wet nurse, that one time I was with another, ma'a akhin li, a brother of mine, another child. That one time I was with another one behind our houses, and we were just looking after the animals. That 2 men came to me. two men came to me wearing extremely white clothes with a bowl of gold filled with ice. They came with this bowl of gold filled with ice, and the messenger is narrating this himself. I was there with another person behind the houses, just looking after the sheep and things, and these two men came wearing white clothes with a gold bowl with ice inside of it. And they took me, these two men, they took me. They got a hold of me, they took me, and they split open my botany, it says, meaning all the midsection. They split up all of my midsection. And they extracted my heart. They took out my heart. Then in this narration it says, the messenger says, فَشَقَّاهُ, that they then split up my heart. They took out my heart after splitting open my chest, took out my heart and then split open the heart. And after they split open the heart, استخرج منه علقة سوداء, they took out a black clot. They took out a black clot and they threw it away. Got rid of the black clot, and that is in the other narration, the portion of the shaitan within you. Took out that black clot and threw it away. ثم غسل قلبي, then they washed the rest of the heart in that gold bowl with that ice until it was completely clean, until the heart was completely clean. Then the messenger is narrating that one of the men said to the other one, weigh him with 10 individuals from his ummah, meaning to weigh the iman of this boy with the iman of 10 people of his ummah. Weigh him, what is he in comparison to his ummah? So weigh him with 10 individuals of his ummah. And so they did so. And the messenger was equal to them. The 10 could not outweigh the messenger. Then the man says to the other one, weigh him in comparison to 100 of them from his ummah. And in the narration it says they did so, and those 100 could not outweigh the messenger. He weighed as they did. Then he said with 1,000, and they did it with 1,000. And the messenger was equal to that. 1,000 could not outweigh the messenger. Then one man says to the other one, forget it. Forget it. Leave it aside. Because if you weigh him by Allah, or rather this is an oath, by Allah, if you weigh him with all of the ummah, by Allah, if you weigh him with all of his ummah, then he will be equal to them. He'll be able to match that. The whole ummah would not outweigh him. So that narration again obviously indicates the story, and it indicates the greatness of the messenger being the best of this ummah. So those narrations, that one there that we just read talks about two people coming to him and doing that incident of splitting the chest. This narration may be differed over slightly, but the core of the narration, the point of the narration is valid. That his heart was split open and the black cloth was taken out and his heart was washed and then put back into his body. The core of the narration is completely valid, because the other narration in Sahih Muslim is absolutely authentic. When Jibreel came to him, in that narration it's not two men, it's Jibreel. Jibreel came to him and split his chest, took out his heart, and the rest of the narration is the same, about the heart being taken out and washed and put back in again. So we know that this narration is absolutely authentic and valid, and that this occurred. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar then, as we already mentioned, said that this splitting of the chest happened 3 times. Happened 3 times. One, in this incident when he was young as a child, so he could grow up upon purity. The second, when he was going to receive the revelation, so that he would receive that upon complete purity. And the third, when he was to be taken up to the heavens, that he would then be upon purity in readiness to meet with Allah and to speak with Allah. In some narrations, in some of the books, the scholars, they say, أَنَّ شَقَّ صَدْرِهِ الشَّرِيفِ sallallahu alayhi wasallam takarrara arba'a marrat. That actually his heart, his chest was split open 4 times. وذكر أن المرة الثانية وهو ابن 10 سنين صلوات الله وسلام عليه. They say that when the ones who say it was 4 times, they say the first one was when he was a child, either 2 or 4 years old. The second one, they say, there was an incident when he was 10 years old. They say there was another incident like that of his chest being split open when he was 10 years old. And then the third and the fourth, as we mentioned, at the time of revelation and at the time of being taken up to the heavens. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned in Zad al-Ma'ad, وكان هديه صلى الله عليه وسلم يدعو إلى الإحسان والصدقة والمعروف. That the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he always used to call to goodness and to charity and to all of the righteous actions. He was the best of the people in his heart, with an open heart, a kind and caring heart towards the people. And he had the best of character. He had the most generous of character, the way he was with people. وَأَنْعَمَهُمْ قَلْبًا, the gentlest and softest of hearts. فَإِنَّ لِلصَّدَقَةِ وَفِعْلِ الْمَعْرُوفِ تَأْثِيرًا عَجِيبًا فِي شَرْحِ الصَّدْرِ. Because when a person engages in those kinds of activities of goodness and righteousness and charity, then that softens and beautifies your heart. So that is regarding the splitting of the chest of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the incidents when that happened. Then it says in the poem, وَبَعْدَ سِتٍ مَعَ شَهْرٍ جائي وفاة أمه على الأبواء. That when he was 6 years old and 1 month, his mother died. When he was 6 years old and 1 month, his mother died. They mentioned the story of how his mother died, that she was on her way traveling to her brothers, the uncles, the maternal uncles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ذهبت به أمه إلى أخواله من بني النجار في المدينة لزيارتهم، وفي طريق العودة من المدينة إلى مكة توفيت بالأبواء. So it's mentioned how his mother Amina was traveling out from Mecca where they lived to Medina, because her brothers lived in Medina, the maternal uncles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she went there to visit them in Medina, and then after the visit she was returning back to Mecca, and on the way back in the place known as Al-Abwa, en route between Mecca and Medina, she died there. She died en route there. Ibn Ishaq, you'll hear this name a lot, he's one of the famous scholars of Seerah. He said, when talking about this incident, بعد ذكر رجوعه عليه الصلاة والسلام إلى أمه آمنة بعد رضاعه من حليمة، كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مع أمه آمنة بنت وهب وجده عبد المطلب بن هاشم في كلاءة الله وحفظه، ينبته الله نباتا حسنا لما يريد به من كرامته. فلما بلغ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم 6 سنين توفيت أمه آمنة بنت وهب. He says that after the messenger finally came back from Halima, when he was 2, she managed to keep him a bit longer, but then eventually he came back obviously to his mother Amina bint Wahab, and so he was with her and his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, and under their care they had gone traveling to see the uncles, and on the way back, when he was 6 years old, that is when his mother died. There are other narrations highlighting this, some hadith that talk about how he died after coming back from the visit to his maternal uncles, and that they died on their way back to Medina. And Imam Ahmad, he reports from Buraidah ibn al-Husayb radiyallahu anhu, he said, خرجت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى إذا كنا بودان قال مكانكم حتى آتيكم. In this narration, Buraidah ibn al-Husayb, a companion, says one time they were traveling with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and when they got to this place called Waddan, the messenger said to them, everybody stay where you are until I come back. And the messenger left. فانطلق ثم جاءنا وهو ثقيل. Then he came back. So they were on this journey. When they got to Waddan, the messenger said to them, everybody just stay here, wait, whilst I go and I'll come back. So they all waited. He went by himself, went somewhere and came back. When he came back, it says in the narration he was thaqil. Thaqil, you could say like he was in a state of being emotional. He was in a somewhat emotional state when he came back. فقال إني أتيت قبر أم محمد. He said, I came to the grave of the mother of Muhammad. Meaning the messenger is talking about himself. I came to the grave of the mother of Muhammad, meaning I went to my mother's grave. So that grave was just off route somewhere there. He told them, you stay, and he went. And he went to the grave of his mother. And then he tells them, the messenger tells them, فَسَأَلْتُ رَبِّي الشَّفَاعَ فَمَنَعَنِيهَا. That I asked Allah for intercession for her, but Allah prevented me from that. وَإِنِّي كُنْتُ نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْ زِيَارَةِ الْقُبُورِ فَزُورُوهَا. And then the messenger told them, I used to prevent you from visiting graves, but you can't visit them now. In the early days of Islam, they were not allowed to go to the graves because much of the shirk that used to exist because of graves. So at the beginning of Islam, it was prevented for anyone to go to the graves. And then afterwards, when Aqidah, Tawheed was settled, the messenger then said to them, I used to prevent you, but you can now go. In other narrations it says, فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُكُمُ الْآخِرَةِ. Because visiting the graves, it reminds you of the afterlife. In the hadith of Abu Hurairah, he says, زَارَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ قَبْرَ أُمِّهِ. That the messenger visited his mother's grave, فَبَكَى وَأَبْكَى مَنْ حَوْلَهُ. And so he cried, and those who were with him cried. So perhaps in this version of the narration, they went with him, or he took some of them with him, and so he cried, and those around him cried. فَقَالْ, in fact no, when it says فَقَالْ إِسْتَأْذَنْتُ, so this doesn't necessitate they went with him, he went alone. When he came back, perhaps he was still crying, and then they began to cry. And then he said to them, إِسْتَأْذَنْتُ رَبِّي فِي أَنْ أَسْتَغْفِرَ لَهَا فَلَمْ يُأْذَنْ لِي. He said to them that I sought permission from my Lord to seek forgiveness for her, but I was not given permission. وَاسْتَأْذَنْتُهُ فِي أَنْ أَزُورَ قَبْرَهَا فَأَذِنَ لِي. And I sought permission from Allah to visit her grave, and I was permitted to do that. فَزُورُوا الْقُبُورَ فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُ الْمَوْتِ. So visit the graves, for indeed they remind you of death. That is where we'll stop on today then. And we'll move on from the next section, which is going to be Right now we've arrived at the age of 6. The messenger is now 6 years old at this stage. And his mother has now died. His father already died. The incident of the chest has occurred at the age of 2 or 4. He then returned back to his mother Amina. Now at the age of 6, he went to visit his uncles in Medina. On the way back, his mother died in Al-Abwa. And this other incident is also mentioned about him visiting the grave. But at the age of 6 now, his mother has died. What happens after that? Who then looks after him after that? From that stage onwards, insha'Allah ta'ala, from next week we'll continue. So we'll stop on that for today. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Any questions up to there?
What's the
I'm 10